Okay, it should be a pretty simple observation or modest observation. I think I found uh, some small evidence for um, the argument um, Uberhaupt or generally against Epicureanism um, in uh, the Kantian system and in um, the way Kant is still beholden to Socrates in a certain way. So I think in Socrates, you can see that the legendary sobriety of Socrates, or as it were, moderation, as Strauss puts it, is sort of cardinal virtue or cause of the eudaimonia or the the good or happy daimon of Socrates um, is explained in many examples in Plato, but one of them is that uh, Socrates can drink as much as he wants or uh, refrain from drinking whenever he wants. His sobriety, uh, I would say, doesn't fairly. I think it's fairly clear to conclude, although somebody might argue that the sobriety doesn't consist simply of him having a tolerance to alcohol. Let's say, like he built up a tolerance to alcohol, now he can drink as much as he wants without becoming intoxicated in any um, way that will lead him to do immoderate acts. But I think it's more that a kind of a strict distinction is made between um, well, it's complicated, but I mean, the suke is the body in one sense, so it's not like the suke is something. So even in the chariot example, the higher part of the soul, it's not clear if it's part of the body or not, but in general, the suke means life. So Kant is still understanding life to be in the body and the source of action rather than of force in the sense of Newton, external, a spring pushing something, force. It's action, it's something coming from life rather than from the mere gravity, let's say, from the one thing pushing into another. Um, so this part of life, or the soul, the highest part of it in Socrates, is able to completely stand back from. I would imagine that even if he was very drunk bodily, he would remain sober in his daimon. I think that's the meaning. So likewise, something any Epicureanism would then bring in the control of something other than this total self-control of the theoretical part of the um, suke or soul, or of nous. In Kant, that shows why Kant is so concerned with the notion of duty, of merit, because the merit of it is partially in the reliability of this power to stand back. If we're at all, um, this idea of the moral merit of the spontaneous choice, it's spontaneous because it comes from life, but it comes from the special higher part of life, um, which was nous in Plato, in the divided line in Aristotle. Um, the merit of the duty uh, consists of it not being done for any Epicurean reason. But the reason why that's valuable to Kant, excluding the Epicurean motives, is because of um, the mob of the senses, as Nietzsche puts it later on. They're involved in a carnival, as it were, in a saturnalia. So they're doing things which are irregular, which can't be relied upon. But when we have a duty to a city or a country, it should be the merit in it. This should be reliable. That's the whole point, I think, of Kant raising this question of moral merit over and above something done right for an Epicurean reason, or because it somehow pleases us. So rationality in this Kantian mode seems to be very popular today in terms of um, its near connection to a kind of instrumental rationality. So far as instrument always suggests uh, the reliable availability of that instrument. Um, Therefore, in Epicureanism, we cannot have duty in the proper sense. We have different demands of different beings, um, and probably in its full sense in a non-political community. Now, all that would depend on further considerations about how strictly we understand the doctrine of Epicureanism and where we get it from. What I know about Epicureanism is, besides from reading little bits here and there, is mostly from Lucretius. There's some other sources on the strict doctrine, and it's connected to a tradition going back before Epicurus, of course, Aristippus. Um, but just in the orbit of Kant, I think we can see something of the difficulty in Epicureanism from a high perspective rather than merely, let's say, from the political arguments, or even from a secondary perspective where we'd say through Epicureanism came in somehow through Hobbes, because Hobbes said the standard is whether the individual is getting something out of joining this so-called social contract or compact, and how can the individual decide that except by his own standards, the standards of that man, rather than reason, because Hobbes brings in the notion that, which is a very powerful notion in its cogency, that as Strauss quotes it, as oft as reason is against a man will be against reason. So we have a turning point in the position of man, which will later become the subject and subjectivity, and reason, which will later become instrumental rationality and, as Simmel calls it, fact.